We're joined now by Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Welcome. Quite a morning, quite a press conference. You heard Congressman Arrington. What's your reaction to what he said and what the president said?
Well, it's good to be with you, Martha. We're in an insane situation right now. I heard what Congressman Arrington said. What we have right now is Speaker McCarthy and MAGA House Republicans saying that they're going to push the default detonator and blow up our economy if they don't get their way on their budget proposals. That would destroy the American economy. What President Biden has said is we'll talk about reasonable budget proposals. He's put $1 trillion of cuts on the table already. It's not true that the president hasn't put forward his own proposal. He put forward a budget, a very detailed budget, with $3 trillion in deficit reduction by closing tax breaks for very, very rich people and big corporations. And Republicans won't accept 1 penny in deficit reduction from closing tax loopholes. The farce of this whole thing is that under Donald Trump, we raised the debt ceiling 3 times. 40% of our national debt actually was accumulated during the 4 years of the Trump administration. And now they're not willing to talk about any revenue from very wealthy people as part of this effort.
And of course, the president did talk about that this morning. It's the most public I've heard him talk about tax revenue. Does that have to go hand in hand with spending cuts? Or is he saying that's just something you should consider? Are those tied together? Because it's clearly a non-starter for Republicans.
Sure. Well, and that's the important point. So Republicans are saying if they don't get things their way, they're going to blow up the economy. That's a very different position than what President Biden's saying. President Biden's saying, look, let's sit down and find a reasonable way to reduce the deficit and debt. He put $1 trillion of cuts on the table. But he's not saying if you don't do it my way, if you don't close these tax breaks for very rich people, I'm going to blow up the economy. And that's the difference here. So, I'm extremely worried about where we are now. I think the markets are going to get shaky. I think we need to move to Plan B, which is what's called the discharge petition in the House, which is where you have Republicans, we only need 5, work together with all 213 Democrats to put together the kind of proposal that even about 30 Republicans were talking about as recently as May, which have a number of elements, including cuts, but a number of other ingredients. It seems to me we're going to have to move in that direction pretty soon.
Plan B, Plan C, the 14th Amendment that the president talked about, is that something you would consider still?
Well, let me just say, Plan A needs to be our focus for the next 48 hours. Plan B, which is a reasonable proposal, if Speaker McCarthy would just let the House work its will, we can have a discharge petition. We could get a majority in the House for a reasonable proposal to prevent default. Plan C would be the 14th Amendment. Look, my view is the president should use all legal options out there. I think that is a legal option, but it's not the preferred option because there's a lot of uncertainty around that approach. It will be litigated.
The president said that this morning. And as Congressman Arrington brought up, Janet Yellen actually told George Stephanopoulos that it could cause a constitutional crisis. So why even consider that?
Well, the difference is that option would be better than a default. The United States has never defaulted in its history. It would create a catastrophe in the economy. So the 14th Amendment is not the preferred alternative. A lot of people predict that even if you go the route of the 14th Amendment, you go into a recession. But if you default, we're talking about depression. We're talking about 18 million people out of work. We're talking about interest rates going up. We're talking about everything getting much more expensive for the American people. That is what Speaker McCarthy and the MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump are threatening if they don't get their way.
What happened here? They seemed pretty close. You heard Kevin McCarthy talking last week and praising the negotiators. What happened? What was the breakdown? Once again, we're in a situation where you're saying it's their fault. They're saying it's your fault. How did this happen?
Well, Martha, I've always been skeptical about this. We have a very weak speaker in Kevin McCarthy. We saw how many rounds of votes it took him to be elected speaker. He does not control his caucus. So he cannot take back a reasonable proposal to his caucus and expected to get the votes, especially when you have Donald Trump egging them on and saying, don't give an inch, default, don't give an inch. So that's what we're facing right now. I again want to emphasize a really important difference. It's not just both sides saying this or that. The Democrats, President Biden is not saying that if he doesn't get his way on how we reduce the deficit over a period of time, that he's going to blow up the economy. That's the difference. Speaker McCarthy and the MAGA Republicans are threatening to blow up the economy if we don't do things exactly their way.
Okay, thanks for joining us this morning. We all have our
with you.
fingers crossed for sure.